Hey everyone, Ryan here at eTrailer. Today we're going to be checking out the line of Valterra electric waste valves. And these are available in a few different configurations. So you have some that have 2 inlets, like the one that we have installed on our camper here today. So this is going to allow you to have 2 different waste tanks flowing in. So we have the gray water hooked up as well as the black water, and it'll come out or dump through one valve. And then we have a single valve system as well. With that said, why don't we take a better look at these, how they operate, how you can work them, and we'll figure out which one is going to be best for your particular setup. Right away, what a system like this is going to do is eliminate the need for you to actually come under here and manually pull the valves whenever you go to drain the tanks. And that's a big deal to some people, perfect example, our neighbor here today who actually owns his camper has a hard time getting down here and doing that, especially over long periods if you have to drain the tanks multiple times on one trip. Now granted, you still are going to have to get down here to actually hook up your drain hose and everything, but you only have to do that twice, right? When you go to set it up, when you go to take it apart. Aside from that, when you're ready to drain the tank, as opposed to having to manually pull the levers, we can just simply flip a switch. The switch assembly to operate the valve's pretty straightforward. On our double valve system, we have our black tank valve and our gray tank valve. Everything's labeled, open, open. If you were to flip the switch, we do have an LED that comes on as well, which I'll show you in a minute. I don't have everything set up to do that just yet. And they also have built-in breakers too, 5-amp breakers to help keep the circuits protected. As far as the single valve ones, it's going to be very similar. That's what this switch looks like here. More or less, you're just missing one of the switches, but it's going to operate the same. Whatever you have it hooked up to, keep it closed. When you're ready to drain, flip it to that open position. So let's test this thing out and actually see it in action. So just to kind of demonstrate what we got going on here, I just removed the drain cap. I'm not going to hook a hose or nothing up to it. And I'll power each one on for a few seconds. I don't want to get too crazy because this camper's winterized. I don't want to lose all the antifreeze in there, but I'll open up our black tank. And when that opens, you see we got flow coming out. Shut that down. Try our gray tank. That one opens up and we got fluid coming out. So like you just saw, worked pretty good. One thing that I was impressed with is the speed at which they open and close. As soon as you flip that switch, that valve opens up, drains out what you need to drain out. When you're done, close it up. And I think that's good. It don't take too long. You're not going to have to kind of wear that electric motor out by taking forever and going real slow. You tell it to close it right away. The same is going to hold true for when you're ready to open it. Well, I got everything set up. I just wanted to show you guys, I mentioned that red LED light coming on. So there's a good visual of it. When you open up the valve, you got power going to it. That's what you're going to see. When you close, turns off. So it just gives you that extra visual aid to let you know what's going on. You can still actually manually operate the valves too for whatever reason if you need to. So this does run on a 12-volt system. So I'm thinking if your battery goes flat or, in a pinch, whatever the case may be, there's this retainer here that pops out. And you take the valve, turn it, and pull it out. And of course, we ran out of fluid in our lines, so we might get a little bit out. But when you pull that open, it'll work like your regular standard type valve. Open it up and let it flow out. And just reverse that procedure to close it back up. There are a few different variations of these valves, and really the main difference is going to be what type of flange the drain portion has. So my advice would be look at the setup you currently have on your rig and match that. So for example, here's the old setup that was on our camper, and we could see that the end of the drain tube has these barrels or these lugs on it. And so that's the one, the style that we installed on ours. That way we could still use any adapters in the same style of hose that he already has, so on and so forth. As to where this one is a little bit different, you know, it's just brown, no lugs or anything like that. So, you know, like I said, check and see what you already got on yours. It's probably gonna be your best bet, and have everything compatible. The same's gonna hold true for the single valve ones as well. So if that's what you're gonna end up going with, definitely check that out. Something to consider when setting these up is the placement of them. With the single valve systems, it's not really a huge deal because they're really not that much bigger than your standard manual type valve. You know, if I hold this up as a comparison, really not much larger than it. Maybe a little bit thicker because you have the motor on there. But with this and the double one, you know, the flow can go either direction. So if yours, you know, on your particular application, you got more space with it like this, that's fine. You got more space with it like this, that's fine. So you can kind of mount it up either way when you're doing that. As for the double one, you know, this is going to take up quite a bit of space, and in most cases, it's going to be a pretty tight fit, you know, to be honest with you. But something that's pretty neat is you can actually rotate these, all right? So it gives you quite a bit more adjustability. So let's say if, you know, you had it set up like this and maybe there's a cross member or something here, you could always tilt that down a little bit to clear that, and this one up, or whatever the case may be. So it's nice that it's not permanently fixed, if you will. That way you can adjust it and actually make it work with your particular camper. The actual tubing and housings are going to be built from ABS plastic, which is pretty much a standard on these campers and recreational type vehicles. You know, it just takes a lot of the road shock and you know, extreme temperatures and stuff a little bit better. So it's good to see that it's going to match up. It'll be the same type of material as what should be there on your camper right from the factory. Something else I wanted to mention too, so if you like the ease of use of this, as far as not having to get underneath there and pull the valves manually, but you're not really too crazy about the electric portion of it, there's kind of something that is in between that. And that's a manual valve, but it has a cable attached to it. So there's kits that will allow you to replace just the valve part there that goes in between the two pipes, and there's a cable on it, right? And a bunch of different lengths. And so what you could do is, say if it's mounted way up underneath here, kind of like how ours is, you could actually take that cable and run it out to the side where it's easier to get to. That way you don't have to reach underneath there. You could run them kind of wherever you want and be able to open and close the valve that way. One of the things that you can use in conjunction with this system is a clear view extension. So in our case, you know, it's kind of sitting further back. To make it easier to even get the hose on, you can use this. That'll bump it out a little bit and make it more manageable. And with it being clear, if you want to, when this is running, you can walk back here, you know, take a look at it and make sure that stuff is actually flowing out into your hose. Honestly, that's really about it as far as, you know, what these are going to do, how they work, so on and so forth. Not really much to them, but there are a few things I want to address pertaining to actually getting these installed and setting them up. And so hopefully I can answer a couple of your questions and help you figure out if this is going to work with your setup or not. A lot of people wonder, how long are the wires? So with the electrical components, they're actually pretty nice. All the switches and everything are already pre-wired and hooked up, so you don't have to bother with that. You know, where you plug into the motors, they have nice sealed connectors and everything. So that's good to see. But the actual length from the ends, you know, the connector end and these bare ends, what you have to work with is roughly about 7 feet. So you may or may not need to extend your wiring just depending on where you actually mount this up. And you're gonna want this switchboard out of the elements. Of course, you know, you wanna put it in a cabinet or inside or something along those lines. If you do need to extend them, it's not really a big deal. Inside of the sheath here, you have 18 gauge wires. And in our case, I actually had to extend the wiring that's going to the motors. All right, and so if that's your case, what I did, I use this style of wire to extend it. So you have this wiring inside of a sheath, so it's extra protected. You have 4 wires inside of there, so I just didn't use the red one. You know, got that out of the way. And, you know, I went color for color, and it was pretty easy to keep track of things like that. As far as the electrical side of things goes, it's pretty straightforward. You know, nice that they already have it all set up and everything. Something that I did, which you can do too, since these are powered on your 12-volt batteries, even though that switchboard has a built-in circuit breaker to keep it protected, I wanted a way to protect our wiring running to the switchboard from our batteries, just in case over time, if it happens to rub against the frame or something like that. So I added some inline fuse holders to accomplish that, and even though it's a little redundant, it's definitely not going to hurt anything. Seems like a lot of people wondered what color wire controlled what. So on the end of this harness, we're going to have a white wire and a black wire, and that's what's going to go to your 12-volt power. The white wire, that will go to your positive lead, and the black wire, that'll go to your ground or your negative post. As far as getting the valves plumbed in, everyone's setup's going to be a little bit different. With the single valve ones, those are definitely more likely to be straightforward, as they're almost a direct replacement, I guess you could say. You know, they're about the same size as the standard valves, so on and so forth. But once you get into this double setup here, you'll probably have to pick up some extra parts and pieces. And it's hard to say exactly for everyone's application. It's just going to depend. But perfect example, ours, you know, you want to make sure you got the proper clearance. And of course, when you hook your drain tubes up, you're going to want them to flow down. That way gravity can pull all the fluids out. But in ours, I actually had to use a 90-degree elbow and then another 90-degree elbow to kind of bend it up towards our black water tank, a extension and a coupler to kind of mate everything together and get that wastewater to flow to our valve here. On the other side of our valve, this is where our gray water is going to come into. And if you're going to be using these valves for your gray water at all, chances are really good you're going to need a reducer. So a lot of times these gray water pipes are going to be smaller, not a 3-inch diameter, just like ours. Today we have 1.5 inches. Some of them will be 2 inches. It kind of just depends on what you got going on. So we use this reducer. It's slid into our valve, then turned it into 1.5 inches. That way our gray water pipe could slide into that. And there's all different types of fittings and parts and pieces, different types of bends and everything like that we carry. So my advice would be look at your setup and do your best to kind of piece it together in your mind and kind of go from there. When plumbing stuff, you know, it's almost inevitable with all these types of projects. You'll probably end up needing some other parts and pieces. One of them, or something that you'll need for sure, is the ABS plastic cement. So for those of you that are familiar with your regular household plumbing, you know, if you ever put any of that together, you have to use the primer and the cement to kind of glue everything together. Well, that's going to be the same with these pipes, but with ABS, it's a special, you know, formulation to allow you to actually glue everything together. Ultimately, it seems like a lot of people who end up installing these are really happy with them. You know, it seems like what a lot of people end up doing if they're having issues with their regular manual valves they're wanting to make a change, end up going to something like this. And it makes sense because, you know, when you're camping, dealing with wastewater and everything isn't the most glamorous thing, right? And something a lot of people don't look forward to doing. So by not having to actually get, you know, your hands and your face in this area while you're draining your tanks, because you can do it more or less remotely and flip that switch, just makes your overall experience that much more enjoyable.